The night my sister introduced me to her fiancé's family, she leaned over and whispered, "Try not to embarrass us, Clem." She said it the way you'd remind someone to wipe their shoes at the door, like I was something you tracked in from outside. The Hargrove estate sat at the edge of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, the kind of place that had a name instead of an address. Whitmore Hall, 200 years of money pressed into every stone, every column, every chandelier that threw gold light across a ballroom full of people who had never once worried about whether the rent would clear. Clementine Foss had worried about that exact thing 14 days ago. She stood near the east wall, holding a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, wearing the dress she'd borrowed from her co-worker Patsy, a navy wrap dress that fit fine except at the shoulders, where it pulled slightly when she moved her arms. She was trying not to move her arms. Her sister Becca was across the room, laughing at something a man in a cream suit said, her head tipped back the way she laughed when there were people watching. Becca always laughed differently when people were watching. Their father, Raymond Foss, was somewhere behind Clementine, probably at the bar, probably already on his second drink, probably talking too loudly about his connections to a city council that had quietly stopped returning his calls 3 years ago. She didn't turn to check. She'd learned not to keep inventory of her father's evenings. It never helped. What she was doing instead, what she always did at parties where she didn't belong, was counting the chandeliers. 4. The staff circulating with trays. 11. The exits she could see from where she was standing. 3. The number of people who had spoken to her since she arrived at 7:43. 0. It was 9:01. "You're in the wrong place." She didn't startle. She almost never startled. When you grew up with a father whose moods shifted without warning, you learned to keep your reactions internal, to process on the inside and present nothing on the outside. So when the voice came from directly behind her right shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it, she simply turned. The man standing there was not someone she recognized, which was strange, because she had quietly catalogued every significant person in the room over the past hour and a quarter. He was tall, not dramatically so, but enough that she had to adjust her gaze upward. Dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that looked deliberate rather than careless. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since become something more interesting than handsome. Angular, weathered in places, a scar that ran along the left side of his jaw like an old parenthesis. His eyes were the particular grey of sky just before a storm commits to itself. "I'm sorry," she said. "The east wall," he said. "Wrong place to stand if you want to go unnoticed. You're directly under the secondary sconce. It lights you up every time someone opens the main door." She looked up at the wall sconce above her, then back at him. "I wasn't trying to go unnoticed," she said. "I was trying to go unbothered. Those are different things." Something shifted in his expression, not a smile exactly, more like the moment before a smile held in suspension. "Hargrove's side or Sutton's?" he asked, meaning whose guest she was, the groom's family or the bride's. "Sutton's," she said. "I'm the sister." He looked at her the way people sometimes looked at Becca when they'd just met Becca, a quick, assessing glance. Except this man's glance didn't move to scan the room for Becca afterward. It stayed on Clementine. "The accountant," he said. She paused. "How do you know that?" "Becca Sutton talks about her family in specific and largely unflattering terms," he said. "She mentioned a sister who does books for small businesses. She made it sound like a character flaw." Clementine looked across the room at her sister. Becca was now touching the sleeve of the man in the cream suit. "She would," Clementine said. "My name is Stroud," he said. "Just the last name. The way people said it when the last name was the part that mattered." She'd heard of a Stroud. She'd heard the name in the particular hushed register that people used when they meant something they didn't want to be overheard saying. She did books for 7 small businesses, and 3 of those businesses were in the kind of neighborhoods where a name like Straud got used as shorthand for a category of problem you didn't want to have. "Clementine Foss," she said. She didn't offer her hand, neither did he. "I know," he said. The room moved around them. Someone laughed too loudly near the windows. A string quartet started up somewhere behind the staircase. A server appeared at Clementine's elbow with a tray of canapés that she declined without looking. She was watching Stroud watch the room. He did it the way she did, methodically, without obvious movement, cataloguing. "You counted the exits," she said. His gaze came back to her. "3, he said. "You?" "3, she said. "I didn't count you as one of them." This time it was actually a smile, brief, controlled, like a door that opened a crack and then decided not to commit. He looked away again. His jaw tightened slightly, and she followed his gaze across the room to where a man in a charcoal suit was making his way toward them with the focused momentum of someone delivering a message he'd rather not deliver. "I need to take this," Stroud said, without moving yet. He was still looking at her. "What do you charge?" She blinked. "For what?" "Bookkeeping. Clean audit. Someone to find where money goes when it doesn't arrive where it's supposed to." She considered telling him this wasn't the appropriate time or venue for a business inquiry. She considered pointing out that she didn't know him. She considered all of the sensible, self-protective things that her mother had tried to teach her before her mother got tired of trying to teach anyone anything and moved to Tucson. "Depends on the size of the operation," she said, "and how far off the books it already is." "Substantially," he said. "Then considerably," she said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card. No logo, just a phone number in embossed black ink on cream paper. "Monday," he said, "if you're interested." He was already turning toward the man in charcoal before she'd finished processing the card in her hand. She watched him go. He moved through the room the way people moved, when they were accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around them. Not aggressively, not showily, but with a certainty of passage that parted the crowd before he was close enough to require it. Across the room, Becca had spotted them, or spotted him leaving Clementine's vicinity. Her expression cycled through something complicated, confusion, recalibration, something sharper. She crossed the room in 40 seconds. Clementine counted. "What did he say to you?" Becca asked. Her voice had the particular tone she used when she wanted to sound casual and didn't quite make it. "He asked about accounting services," Clementine said. Becca stared at her. That's Straud. Do you know who that is?" "I know who that is." "Then you know that you don't?" Becca stopped, looked at the card in Clementine's hand. Her eyes went a shade narrower. "He gave you his card? He did?" "Why?" It wasn't a question. It was the sound of Becca encountering information that didn't organize itself correctly against her existing understanding of how the world worked. An understanding in which Clementine was background furniture, and men like Stroud were for different rooms than the ones Clementine occupied. "I imagine," Clementine said, "because he needs a bookkeeper." She put the card in her borrowed dress's small inner pocket and went to find a chair that wasn't under a sconce. She almost didn't call. She spent Sunday making lists the way she always worked through decisions. A column for reasons to, a column for reasons not to, a third column for things she didn't know yet that could go either way. The third column was the longest. She knew that the name Straud connected to things she didn't want to know the details of. She knew that her current income was covering rent, utilities, and groceries in that order of certainty, and that one of her 7 clients had just told her he was scaling back to monthly bookkeeping instead of weekly, which meant a 15% reduction in her stable income starting in October. She knew that the card was cream paper, and the phone number was local, and the man had a scar along his jaw, and had noticed exactly where she was standing in a room full of 200 people. She put the card in her bag and called Monday at 9:03. A woman answered. Efficient, unhurried. "Stroud's office. This is Clementine Foss. I was given this number." "Yes," the woman said, as if she'd been expecting this call, which meant she'd been told to expect it. "Can you be here at 11? The address was a building in the financial district. Not a warehouse, not a parking garage, not any of the architectural cliches that the situation might have suggested. It was a glass and steel building, with a lobby that had a security desk and a large piece of abstract art that Clementine suspected had cost more than she'd made in the past 2 years combined. She took the elevator to the 12th floor. The office was wide and spare. Windows on two sides, a desk that held almost nothing, a laptop, a single folder, a glass of water. Stroud was standing when she came in, which she hadn't expected. He didn't look like a man who stood up when people entered rooms. He looked like a man who waited for rooms to come to him. "You came," he said. "You said Monday," she said. "I'm reliably literal." He gestured to the chair across from his desk and then sat. She sat. She'd worn her own clothes today, dark slacks, a white button-down, shoes that were professional without being expensive, because she'd learned early that the goal was to look competent, not aspirational. He slid the folder across the desk. She opened it. It took her 11 seconds to understand what she was looking at, and another 4 seconds to decide how to respond to understanding it. The figures in front of her were from 4 different shell accounts, each with transactions that mapped against each other in a pattern she recognized. Money, moving in circles. The kind of circles that looked like velocity on the surface and revealed, if you traced them carefully enough, that certain amounts were not returning to where they originated. "Someone's skimming," she said. 340,000 over 14 months, he said. "Give or take." "Not give or take," she said. "That's an approximation. I'd want to see the source ledgers. That's why you're here." She looked up from the folder. "I need you to understand what you're asking. You want me to trace internal theft in an organization that I suspect doesn't report its full activity to the IRS. Correct, and if I find the source of the discrepancies, you'll be paid, handsomely and promptly." "I wasn't asking about the money," she said. "I was asking what happens to the person I identify." A pause. The length of it told her he was deciding how honest to be. She'd learned to read pauses. Her father had been full of them, the specific kind that meant he was calculating, not considering. "That," Stroud said finally, "is not your department." She closed the folder. She sat back on his desks and looked at him directly, the way she'd taught herself to look at people who expected her to look down or look away. "Then it's not my books either," she said. She was already reaching for her bag when he said, "I don't kill people for accounting errors." She stopped. "The man who took the money will be removed from my organization," he said. "Removed and warned. What he took will be reclaimed where possible. What can't be reclaimed comes out of his future earning with us." He paused again, shorter this time. "We're a business, Miss Foss. We have personnel policies." "For a syndicate," she said. "For an organization," he said, with a very slight emphasis that managed to communicate both correction and acknowledgement simultaneously. She looked at the folder on his desk, at her own hands, at the window behind him, where the city was going about its Monday in the bright, flat light of October. "I want 50% more than whatever you were planning to offer," she said. "Done," he said. "Without knowing what I was planning to offer, because whoever you were going to hire before me either cost less or wasn't going to be as thorough," she said. "If the first, you get what you pay for. If the second, you've already been waiting 14 months. You can afford me." He looked at her for a long moment, that grey storm gaze that didn't shift or wander. "Tuesday," he said. 8 a.m. you'll have access to the complete records." She stood. "I'll need a workspace that isn't this office," she said. "Somewhere I can close the door." "There's a room on 11, he said. "It has a door. I'll also need whatever you need," he said. "Make a list." She almost smiled at that. A list. She made a list for everything. She left without shaking his hand. The records was a disaster in the specific way that all improvised financial systems were disasters. Not chaotic exactly, but jury-rigged, held together with the organizational equivalent of duct tape and optimism. Someone had started a proper double-entry system, and then, approximately 4 years in, handed it off to someone who didn't know what double-entry meant and had compensated by creating additional columns instead of additional rigor. She spent Tuesday identifying the architecture, Wednesday mapping the actual transaction flows. By Thursday afternoon, she had isolated 3 accounts that behaved differently from the rest. Not dramatically, but the way a person behaves differently when they know they're being watched versus when they think they're not. Small things, rounding patterns that didn't match, timestamps that clustered in ways that suggested manual entry rather than automated processing. She was at her desk on the 11th floor at 6:47 on Thursday evening when the door opened without a knock. She didn't look up. I said I'd send a preliminary by end of week. It is end of week, Stroud said. It's Thursday. In my industry, Friday is a working day with complications, he said. Thursday evenings are when things get done. She looked up then. He was standing in the doorway with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked less like the man from the ballroom, more like someone who'd been working, actually working, the kind that left marks. There was a faint tension around his eyes that she hadn't seen at Whitmore Hall. There are 3 accounts, she said, but only one person with access to all 3. The other 2 are decoys, probably set up deliberately to spread suspicion. Show me. She turned the laptop toward him. He came around the desk to look, which put him close enough that she could smell whatever he used. Nothing sweet, nothing obvious, just something clean and faintly sharp. She kept her eyes on the screen. Here, she said, pointing. These transactions occur in pairs, always within a 48-hour window. The first transfers out, the second transfers to an account that routes through here. She pulled up a second window. And here. It dead ends in an account opened 14 months ago. Who opened it? The account is in a name I don't recognize. But the opening date corresponds exactly with when your discrepancy began. And the authorization signature in your internal records. She pulled up the third window. Is this one? She watched his face. He was still. The kind of still that was the opposite of calm. The kind of still that meant something was being processed and contained with considerable effort. Renshaw, he said. She didn't know who Renshaw was. She didn't ask. You're certain, he said. It wasn't quite a question. The probability is 94% based on the signature analysis alone, she said. If you can get me access to the actual account records from the outside bank, I can take it to 99. You can't take it to 100. Nothing's 100, she said, but 99 is a courtroom standard. He was quiet. He was looking at the screen, but she had sense he wasn't seeing it anymore. He was seeing something further back, something that had context she didn't have. Then he straightened. Close it down for tonight, he said. I'll send someone with the external records tomorrow morning. She began saving her files. If you're confronting this person, I know how to handle my own house, he said. Quiet. Final. I wasn't questioning that, she said. I was going to say, the decoy accounts need to be closed before he's confronted, or there's a chance he moves what's left. Stroud looked at her. Something in his expression shifted in a way she couldn't quite name. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was more like an adjustment. Like recalibrating a measurement. I'll have them frozen tonight, he said. Good. She finished saving. She shut the laptop. She put on her coat and picked up her bag and was almost to the door when he said her name, just her first name, the way he hadn't used it yet. Clementine. She turned. You're good at this, he said. It didn't sound like a compliment the way most people gave compliments. It sounded like an observation he was making despite himself, the way you noted the weather, because it was true and it would be dishonest not to acknowledge it. I know, she said. She left. The external records arrived Friday at 7:50 a.m. She was already at her desk. By noon she was at 99.3% and writing the final summary in the particular clear, unambiguous language she used for reports. No hedging, no softening, no passive voice. The money moved from here to here to here. The authorization came from here. The account was opened by someone using this name, but the behavioral signatures match this internal pattern. Here is the documentation. Here is the conclusion. Here is what it cost. Stroud read the report in his office while she sat in the chair across from his desk. He read the way she liked people to read, actually reading, not scanning, not looking up every few seconds to ask questions. He got to the end and set it down and was quiet for a moment. $342,811, he said. Not give or take, she confirmed. He reached into his desk and produced an envelope. Your fee, he said, plus the additional you negotiated, plus a bonus for the timeline. He paused. You did in 4 days what my last consultant told me would take 6 weeks. Your last consultant was building in buffer time to protect himself in case he was wrong. she said. "I don't do that." "What do you do if you're wrong?" "I'm not wrong," she said. She picked up the envelope. She didn't open it in front of him. "Is there anything else you need from me on this?" "For this particular matter, no," he said. She noticed the construction. This particular matter. Not a closed door. A door left slightly ajar. She should close it. She should take the envelope and go back to her 7 clients. Back to her apartment where the radiator made sounds like someone learning to play percussion. Back to the careful small life she had built on the understanding that staying small meant staying safe. Becca had called twice since the party. She hadn't answered. Her father had sent a text asking if she was coming to dinner Sunday. She hadn't responded to that either. They existed in her life the way weather existed, arriving without being invited, passing when they were ready, leaving the same landscape behind. If another matter came up, she said, the rate would be higher. "Naturally," he said. She stood. He stood, which again she hadn't expected, and again didn't know what to do with. She became, for a moment, acutely aware of the exact amount of space between them. Not much, because the desk was less wide than most desks, because she'd come around it the first time to show him the screens, and they were now on the same side, and neither of them had recalibrated the distance. "You're not what your sister described," he said. "I know," she said. She described something that would make her feel better about herself. She described someone who couldn't count past 10 without using her fingers, he said. Clementine laughed. She hadn't expected to laugh. It came out quiet and involuntary, the kind of laugh that surprises even the person doing it. Stroud watched it happen the way he watched most things, steadily, without performing a reaction to it. But something in the grey of his gaze went fractionally warmer, the way a colour changes when the light hits it differently. "I'll be in touch," he said. "Miss Foss." Back to the last name. The distance returned, professional and deliberate. She recognized it for what it was, a boundary being redrawn after a momentary lapse, and she respected it because she understood it. She did the same thing herself. "Stroud," she said. She left. In the elevator, she opened the envelope. She counted the bills once, then again. Then she put them back in the envelope and held it in both hands and looked at the silver elevator doors and thought about the specific way he'd said her name Thursday evening and the specific way his expression had shifted when she told him about the decoy accounts and the amount of space there had been between them just now, and how she had been aware of all of it with the kind of precision she usually reserved for numbers. Numbers didn't do this. Numbers stayed where you put them. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She walked out into the October air, which was cold and bright and smelled like the city, concrete and exhaust and something faint and almost good underneath. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "There's a second matter," Stroud said. "It's more complex than the first." She stopped walking. Around her, people moved past in both directions, going somewhere, coming from somewhere, all of them with their own arithmetic of choices and costs and variables they were trying to manage. "How much more complex?" she said. "Considerably," he said. She started walking again. "Then considerably more expensive," she said. A pause, brief, this time, not calculating. "Something else. I expected as much," he said. And she realized, with the particular clarity that came to her when a pattern finally resolved, when the numbers stopped being noise and became signal, that she was not going back to her 7 clients and her careful small life. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. She didn't know what that meant about her judgment. She knew exactly what it meant about his books.